Hi, Keith here with Rebel Civics. Today I'm going to talk about the proxy war between US and NATO against Russia. And it's taking place in Ukraine, but it's really NATO and the US that are fighting this war by proxy using Ukraine. I'm going to go through some of the history and a few newer developments. This isn't a news show, but I want to talk about what's going on right now. The question, as I put in the title, will they successfully start World War III? There's a slight bit of sarcasm in there, but the best sarcasm is when there's a little truth to it. I don't know if they're seriously trying, but they sure are doing a good effort to do it. You might ask them, maybe they want to start World War III, maybe they don't. I don't know, but they seem to be trying. The U.S. government and NATO, with NATO, part of NATO, U.S. government / NATO, they've been goading the Russian government into war since well before the 2014 coup that was orchestrated by the U.S. State Department when they overthrew the elected government of Ukraine. U.S. State Department, CIA, all over that one. It really goes back to the end of the Cold War. So if you want to talk about history, we got to go back all the way to there. Putin finally obliged this decades-long effort that the U.S. and NATO have been pushing. Early this year, February 24th, actually, the invaded Ukraine, as everybody knows by now. Right? I had a look at this on February 25th. I published an article. So on the February 24th, when this happened, I think they're trying to start World War III. That's when I first started paying more attention to Ukraine. I'm going to show you my article that was published by Uncover DC on February 25th. And then on April, I did the first Rebel Civics episode, actually. This is episode 27. Thanks, everybody, for watching. The first episode was called Meddling in European Affairs, and it was actually on this. So I think it's time to take another look at this effort to start World War III. It's only intensified since February and continued since April when I did the Unsafe Space episode. So it's coming up on 8 months now. They've been just building this up. So some recent events, just to set the basis here. Ukraine, as everybody should know, they used to be part of the Soviet Union, USSR, for many years. It's got a long history of being captured and divided up and grabbed by these guys and that guys and run by somebody else and all kinds of regimes going back 1,000 years. It's got a bunch of distinct regions. A few off the top of my head, the western half is very Polish, used to be part of Poland. A lot of people there speak Polish. The middle part is, I guess you could call Ukraine. They speak Ukrainian. The whole eastern part of it, they're Russians. They're ethnic Russians. They speak Russian. They use their Russian culture. Russian was an official language of Ukraine because so many people speak Russian. Used to be part of Russia. And, that was partly driven by the Soviet Union and their Russian programs. But anyway, that's the way it is right now. So I meant to make this brief, sorry. After the Soviet Union collapsed, Ukraine became an independent country. The Cold War supposedly ended. But what really happened is that the whole Cold War got repurposed. So the U.S. at the time committed to not expand NATO past the East-West Berlin line, not to move NATO any closer to Russia than it was at the time of the end of the Cold War, like 1991. That was one of the Bush administrations and Gorbachev, I believe. But anyway, there was a commitment made. It wasn't a treaty, but as they say, commitment by a politician is is the lowest form of human commitment. Is a politician to the citizens or a politician to another politician. So anyway, Bush telling Gorbachev, I think it really matters. Anyway, they did commit it. That promise was ignored by every single U.S. president since, every single one. NATO's expanded throughout Eastern Europe, and that's a key part of the history here. Then we get up to 2014. That's when the coup in Iran happened. The moderate government that was open to Russia had accepted some funding from Russia. They were ousted by force, with the U.S. government orchestrating that. And one of the first things they did in their new pro-American version is they outlawed Russian as a official language. That was one of a number of anti-Russia things they did with this new government that the U.S. installed or helped install or whatever. Lots of anti-Russia, pro-U.S., pro-Western moves were made. That's when the secession vote of Crimea and Donbass happened. Crimea left Ukraine. They petitioned to join Russia. Russia accepted Crimea for a couple good reasons. One is that the only warm weather port for Russia is in Crimea. And there's other reasons. It's a big economic powerhouse. And it was part of Russia up until it was handed as kind of a token to Ukraine administratively during the Soviet Union. But it's pretty much Russian there for the most part. And also the Donbass region, Donetsk and Luhansk, apologies for those people if I'm pronouncing them wrong. They also had referendums, voted to secede from Ukraine, became independent, petitioned to join Russia, but Russia turned them down. Putin turned them down. So they've been declared themselves independent since 2014, although the US, most of Europe, certainly NATO, they disagree. The UN even disagrees. Russia recognized them. Anyway, ever since then, the Ukraine was waging this low-level war against Donbass for 8 years, shelling them. According to CNN, they've killed 14,000 people. This is before the Russian invasion. So the Ukraine government killed 14,000 people in the Donbass in the last 8 years since they left. There's also 1.5 million were displaced from their homes. That's according to CNN, which is a pro-Ukrainian news source. That's the numbers they have. I've seen those numbers floating around. So anyway, they've killed 14,000 people. This war started at least in 2014. Like, this war did not start in February of this year. Ukraine started the war, and they started it in February. As far as egging it on, you could go back all the way to 91 and the Cold War and NATO. But at least have to realize this war started in 2014. Anyway, now we get up to today. 24 February this year, 2022, Russia invades Ukraine. They came in through Crimea. And just for fun, I went back and looked at a report on from that time. It's interesting to look at what they were saying back then. So this is a CNN report on the 24th, I believe. So the 24th, 25th. Yes, this is on February 24th. This is the day of the invasion. Now, because of the time zones, around noon Eastern in the U.S., it was already well underway. Started at 8 p.m., 9 p.m. our time. So, and they started at 4 a.m. The first thing happened, they came in through Crimea, which is for the last 8 years has been inherently part of Russia. So that was no problem. That's where they came in. So they just talk in this article about it. The one thing I was going to read here, this is a fun one because it exposes the regime media. Like CNN is just part of the regime. They're funded by pharmaceutical companies and they have super access to the White House. Like CNN people can go to White House press conferences. They're just a talking heads for the regime. By that, I mean, big crony corporate interests like pharmaceutical companies and the U.S. government. So what they reported, Putin made a speech. This was 5 a.m. our time, so shortly after it started, saying he decided to conduct a special military operation to protect people who've been subjected to abuse and genocide by the Kiev regime for 8 years, repeating a baseless claim about Ukraine's Russian separatist-backed Donbass. So that's the part I wanted to just highlight. This was noon on February 24th, the day Russia invaded. CNN's already feeding us a line of bull, this baseless claim. Like, I call them on that. Like, that ain't true. It's not basis. That I just said the numbers. At this point, Ukrainian government had killed 14,000 people in Donbass and displaced 1.5 million people, according to CNN, actually, which is kind of funny. But anyway, I don't know what they mean by baseless. So apparently what CNN believed and what the other parts of the regime media believed on February 24th of this year, and they still tout that today, is that the government can kill 14,000 people by bombing them. Like, that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. It is what President Lincoln would have done, but then I digress. Anyway, so since then, we've had 8 months of this same proxy war, continuous escalation. The Ukraine government had never recognized the independence of the Donbass region or Crimea. They had a hard time doing anything about Crimea because Putin drew a line in the sand on that. Like, we're keeping this place. You get your fists out of this. But Donetsk and Luhansk, pardon me again, they were taking that back by force. So people have been living for 8 years with their government bombing them. All right. I was going to run through super quick some of what's happened like further back. So then I'll get back to the last 8 months of U.S. and NATO via Russia in the proxy war. This continuous escalation just been going on and further and further. There's been zero peace negotiations. All we get is saber rattling, bombing, killing, lots of threats, tons and tons of money. I'm going to do a follow the money section. Lots of free weapons handed to Ukraine, and then sanctions, which are basically, that's when the U.S. attacks the U.S. citizens by preventing trade. So I'll get back to that, but permit me, if you all want to sit back for a minute and just let me blast through this. It was interesting going through Ukraine's history background. I'm not going to show any links in this because there's so much stuff here. I would be switching tabs on you so fast your eyes would go bad. Between the 4th and 7th century, that's when the first Slavic community was established in the Ukraine area. The 9th century is when the Kievan Rus was established, Slavic. Interestingly enough, this whole Russia thing basically started in Kiev. I found that interesting. In what we call Kiev, they called it Kievan, and it was Rus, R-U-S, that's spelled. Anyway, that was the 9th century. In the 14th century, Lithuania took over rule. There was the king, and they conquered Ukraine. So 1400s, 1500s, it was Lithuania ruled pretty harshly. 1569, Poland, Lithuania, they turned the people into serfdom. A lot of persecution. In the 16th century, Moscow control started growing, the Russian, what became Russia. Cossacks. 1648, the Cossacks was a revolution against the harsh Polish rule. So they were kind of rebelling against the Polish rule there. 1654 to 67 was the Russo-Polish War. That led to a partitioning of Ukraine. In 1686, the eastern part of Ukraine came under Russian rule as a payment to Poland. They're trading parts of the country. So these are these like kings and whoever is in power. They're like trading pieces of Ukraine back and forth between Russia and Poland. 1772 to 95, the Russian Empire conquest of Crimea. They invaded, they conquered Crimea, and they partitioned it off Poland from that. And the Russian Empire was controlling Crimea. This is 1772. It's before the U.S. war for independence from Britain. The Russian Empire and then Austria controlled all of present-day Ukraine for the next 100 years. Austria invaded too. Then in 1918, Ukraine declared independence after years of domination from Poland and Russia. 1919, the Bolshevik Red Army attacked. They gained control back. So that didn't last very long, about a year. Became the Ukrainian Soviet Republic. 1930s was what they called the Russification. So I guess that is part of why a lot of people speak Russian there now, because that was a Soviet Union program. They called it Russification. And that's also the famine. If you follow Ukraine history, that's often something we talk about. Tremendous famine. Millions of people died. Lot. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but a large number of people in Ukraine died. That's when a lot of Ukrainians ended up in Western Europe and the U.S. Was to getting away from that famine. They escaped from the Soviet Union. Anyway, huge famine, huge numbers there. 1938, Khrushchev became head of the Ukrainian Communist Party. Interestingly, Khrushchev is actually Ukrainian. He's not Russian heritage. He is Ukrainian. Then World War II, Germany invaded. They were initially viewed as liberators, but then the Nazis took control and they realized, guess what? This is actually worse, because the Nazis treated Slavs with contempt, and they're quite harsh in the World War II occupation, as they did pretty much everywhere else, just like Poland, just like other parts of Europe that they got in. So anyway, that was even worse during that part when Germany was occupying it. 1953, Stalin died. World War II ended. You all know that story. I don't need to go into that. Stalin died in 1953, and Khrushchev was appointed head of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. So he got promoted when Khrushchev died from head of the Communist Party of Ukraine to the head of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. So Khrushchev, the old Cold War guy that we hear about, talking with Reagan, Kennedy, I guess, and Reagan. And anyway, Khrushchev, he was actually Ukrainian. And that's how Crimea ended up as part of Ukraine. So the Crimea was administratively transferred from Russia to Ukraine as kind of like a little bonus for Ukraine, that they can just say, hey, you guys can have this part. But under the Soviet Union, it doesn't really matter. Everything's administered from Moscow anyway. So it didn't really make any difference. It's kind of a paperwork thing. So anyway, that was 1954 when Crimea became officially part of Ukraine, whatever you want to call Ukraine. When it was Ukraine Communist Party, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. Then 1991, you'll remember that, the Berlin Wall came down. Ukraine became independent when the communist system of the Soviet Union collapsed on itself. As an aside, we all know socialism, communism, it can't work. It's impossible. So anyway, 1991 is when that ended. So there's I didn't mean to spend that much time on it, but I'm a little, I guess I'm fascinated partly by that long history. Ukraine, you don't even know what you want to call Ukraine. That whole tirade, and I skipped a lot of stuff. I found out more changes and people invading and all kinds of stuff. And you could go back further and it's same thing. The word Ukraine, it just means at the border or borderland. So Ukraine is actually just borderland, if you want to say it in English. It's like the border between East and West, the border between Russia and Poland, or Russia and Lithuania, or Poland and Germany, Poland and Austria. What's now Belarus and Germany, or something like. It means borderland. So I find it interesting. People, they won't and mine about the lines, like about Ukraine and Crimea and Donetsk, and you just ask, like, well, where is the line supposed to be? I don't even know what Ukraine should be. Like, I'm not very interested in arguments about the line in Ukraine should be here or there or everywhere. So anyway, yeah, Poland, the different regions here. I'll just touch on that briefly. Like the western part that's Polish, that was part of Poland. It was part of Germany. It was part of Austria, part of Lithuania, part of Russia. Who knows? But a lot of people there speak Polish. They kind of vote more pro-West. The middle part's Ukrainian. The eastern part's all these Russian people. They're mostly, seem to be, best I can tell, they're mostly in favor of Russia. Anyway, let me get into the real war. So this war that we got ongoing here, which is what I really wanted to talk about. Here I'm 26 minutes in and still talking about that history. So NATO expansion since 1991, after the Soviet Union broke up. When people say that Putin's invasion was unprovoked, they're either ignorant or they're lying. That's the only two possibilities. It certainly was provoked. And I'm not justifying it. Don't take me wrong. I'm not saying that Putin isn't a bad guy. I don't like Putin. I don't like any of these people. The Ukrainian government is the most corrupt government in Europe, unless you don't want to count Russia, which is pretty corrupt. But as far as all of Europe, Ukraine is the most corrupt government there. So in 2013, the guy, again, I apologize, I don't pronounce his name right, Yakonovich, he was working on a EU agreement. So he's from Crimea. They were negotiating with Russia, negotiating with the West. He was kind of doing, kind of a balanced thing. They had taken some money from Russia, lots of trade with Russia, lots of trade with the West, but he was moving, he wanted to move more towards, talked about moving more towards the EU, but they suspended prep for an agreement with EU. That was in 2013. Then there was an election, big turmoil at the time. The regional differences in that election, I don't have the chart handy, but that's interesting to look at. It's very telling to look at the voting chart from that election before the 2014 coup, right before. It might have been just a few months before that, but it was right before that. The Polish area to the west, overwhelmingly the pro-US, pro-West candidate, pro-EU. They talked about those people wanted to join the EU. They would join NATO, join the EU. Totally open to that. That area was like in the 90% in favor of the guy for that. The Ukraine section in the middle was kind of mixed. And then the whole eastern part, which is Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, Donetsk, the Donbass provinces, and a bunch of other, they're not provinces, obelisks, I think they call them. Those areas, and then a whole bunch of other areas in that eastern part of Ukraine. Those people voted in the 90-95% kind of numbers in favor of the pro-Russian candidate. And what happened about then was the pro-Russian guy won, and that was no good to the U.S. So what they did, U.S. State Department, Victoria Nuland, famous phone conversation. John Kerry, Secretary of State John Kerry was there. This is Obama days. Oh, by the way, when Joe Biden was vice president and in charge of Ukraine. Ambassador Pyatt, all these guys, they were like, we know now, they handpicked a new president. The State Department, the CIA orchestrated a violent coup. They overthrew the government, ousted the president. Yanukovych, like they set up a diversion for him to get out. They put his car from his presidential palace or whatever they call it there. They sent his car with an entourage, like he's leaving because this coup's happening. And the snipers, probably the snipers, which were another side trained by the CIA in Poland, but snipers are shooting at his car, and then they secretly put him in a helicopter, and then he escaped to Crimea and then went from there to Moscow. But he got out by helicopter by sneaking out. They tried to kill him by shooting at his car, and they faked that part. So that's how the president got out. That's what was going on. That's the U.S. State Department and the CIA heavily involved in that. New president gets installed, totally pro-U.S., pro-EU, pro-West, anti-Russia. That's who gets installed. New government comes in. One of the first things they did was they want to ban Russian as an official language for Ukraine. Now you want to trigger people. A huge number of people in Ukraine are native Russian. They speak Russian. They want to ban that as an official language. Yeah, that's right up there with Canada trying to ban French. That's what happened. That's when the secession vote happened in Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk. All three of them overwhelmingly, at least by the numbers we see, they voted to leave Ukraine and become independent and petitioned to join Russia. So all three of them petitioned to join Russia, but only Crimea was accepted by Russia, by Putin, basically, and by the Russian government. Donetsk and Luhansk were rejected, so they remained independent. They called themselves the Republic of Donetsk and the Republic of Luhansk. Then from 2014 to 2022, this is when, as I mentioned earlier, the Ukrainian government has been shelling Donetsk and Luhansk. CNN, again, I'm just going to say it again because CNN reported this, 14,000 killed, 1.5 million displaced from their homes. There was a huge amount of shelling, major shelling reported in the 5 days right before Putin sent troops in on the February 24th. So Ukraine was upping this war that week before, major upwings. On February 21st, the Russian government formally recognized Donetsk and Luhansk as independent. Now that really stirred up people, stirred up Ukraine, stirred up the United States government, stirred up the EU people and NATO. NATO people did not like that at all because they were fine with Ukraine. They encouraged it. Ukraine shelling the Donbas provinces to tell them, like, no, you can't vote independent. That was February 21st of this year. Then February 24th, Putin invaded started. So the concept in what I showed you at first, I'm just going to pop that up again. Now that you've heard all that, that's what I mean here. This, like, CNN first says that 14 million people killed, 14,000 people were killed in the shelling by the government, 1.5 million displaced from their home, reported by CNN. And then CNN also reports that it's a baseless claim when Putin said that the people of Donetsk have been subjected to abuse. CNN claims that's baseless. They had to switch. I think they had to switch because the regime's instructions were that support Ukraine. This is about the time people were taking down their COVID decorations and putting up their Ukraine decorations. Like, the order went out. Ukraine flags, change your profile pictures. You can take down that little banner that says I got vaccinated, and you put up your Ukrainian flag. That's what everybody's supposed to do. And all these media agencies, they jump on that. Like, yeah, sure, this is the new thing. I support the new thing. Anyway, I spent a lot of time on history. I don't know how many people are still with me, but I'm going to continue on, actually talk about what I wanted to show on, which is really what really happened. So another thing I was going to show you, I mentioned the article I wrote. In addition to my rants I do here on Unsafe Space, the Rebel Civics Show, I'm also a writer with for Uncover DC. If you want to know what DC's doing, it's a pretty cool website. They totally expose stuff. Anyway, I'm one of the people, I submit articles once in a while. On February 24th, when the invasion happened, my first thought was, will they successfully start World War III? And I wrote this article. They liked it. They published it immediately. So this went out on February 25th. I'm going to just read some of this. And I don't mean it as an I told you so. I just mean it as, like, this was freaking obvious. Like, this is what they've been trying to do for decades. When Putin went in, he was reacting to what the Ukrainian government and the U.S. and NATO have been doing really since 1991, but certainly since 2014. Anyway, I'll read a few things here because I do write a lot better than I talk, and way more succinctly. I'm glad y'all spend an hour with me here, but reading me, I could probably get all this out in 10 minutes of your reading time because I don't wander as much in my thoughts. It's one step closer, folks. The U.S. and Russia have been rattling sabers since the week after the end of the Cold War. Russia and U.S. both upped their game this week with pro-war rhetoric and aggressive military moves in Eastern Europe. This week, Putin formally recognized the Donbas region, republics of Donetsk and Luhansk, as independent. Russia moved troops in the area. There are reports of missile strikes at the Ukrainian military installations near Kiev. This is the new spelling of Kiev. I think the editors changed it because I didn't spell it that way. I didn't even know what that spelling was at this time. The action is being referred to as a, quote, invasion. So anyway, I wrote this the morning of February 24th when the first reports are coming out. So we didn't really know what was happening then. We just heard reports that Russian troops were moving into Ukraine and that there was some reports of shelling. And it was presumed to be the Russians at the time. But anyway, I think it was pretty obvious to people that are willing to actually think rationally about what's been going on. Biden responded with sanctions immediately, like boom. They moved U.S. military infantry, attack helicopters, and fighter jets. Blue means the link. So just like I do on the show, when I write, I got lots of links. Anybody that wants to check sources, you just click and follow them. So they were moving fighter jets, troops into Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. And of course, there was thousands of troops already there. Putin's drawing a line in the sand. I look at it just like the line in the sand that Kennedy drew in the Cuban Missile Crisis when the Soviet Union installed missile sites in Cuba that could reach DC. It's a line in the sand. They're saying, no, we don't want this. Putin's saying, yet. And he pointed out that Russia has the largest nuclear missile collection in the world. I think it's, don't quote me, it's something like 6,400. We have about 500 less. By we, I mean the United States government. I don't actually have a nuclear missile, although I do think, as an aside, that certainly, low yield battlefield nuclear weapons are covered by the Second Amendment. But that's a subject for another show. Putin has the largest collection of nuclear weapons in the world. Between Putin and Biden, that's like over 90% of them all. Biden's response to this was already like, game on, let's do this. Of course, I was paraphrasing. But I did wonder what the next move for the U.S. was. Sanctions are an act of war. So once you do sanctions on the people of a country, the sanctions are against the U.S. and Europe just as much as they're against Russia. Hence the firewood being a major social media hashtag in Germany right now, as people wonder what they're going to do for the winter. Anyway, U.S. immediately reacted with sanctions, sending money, trying to fire everybody up. And I wondered what the response could be. So what I was thinking the morning of the invasion of what the U.S. actions might be, I thought they could trigger a response that might go from the failure of Biden to get reelected. Probably that's going to happen, at least if he lives or whatever, to a nuclear war that destroys a large part of the surface of the Earth. There's a whole range of possibilities between those two. But all you saw was the war hawks at the time. They were like thrilled to death. I'm sure the Pentagon was drooling with anticipation, looking at plans, blah, blah, blah. I won't read too much more of this. I wanted to read a quote, though. I got into whether or not they would start a war, get involved in a war. I was pretty sure they would. And whether it would be legal or not, I don't know. This whole thing's personal. Remember, Biden has skin in this game. He was in charge of Ukraine as VP when the coup was orchestrated. Victoria Nuland and John Kerry and those people, like Biden was all over this. Here's the number here I remembered. Yeah, between Biden and Putin, they have control of 90% of the world's nuclear arsenal. I wrote this here. Kind of funny. What could go wrong? I always like that sarcastic expression. I don't use the hashtag sarcasm in articles. Uncover DC picked this picture to stick in the article after I said what could go wrong. Yeah, that's a good picture. Then I got into George Washington. This is the quote I was going to read. This is a former U.S. president on the Ukraine war, speaking about the Ukraine war, pretty much. George Washington said in his farewell address, "The great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is in extending our commercial relations to have with them as little political connection as possible. Europe has a set of primary interests which to us have none or a very remote relation. Hence, she must be engaged in frequent controversies, the causes of which are essentially foreign to our concerns. Hence, therefore, it must be unwise in us to implicate ourselves by artificial ties in the ordinary vicissitudes of her politics, or the ordinary combinations and collisions of her friends or enmities. This was 1796, George Washington said that. It's not worded exactly as presidents talk today. I don't think Biden could successfully read that. And that's not something Trump would say. But anyway, it's been a while since we had a president that could talk like this. But the topic, he's dead on. Like, George Washington nailed it. Like, we should pay attention to him. So I said in the article, I think that Biden should be listening to him. Generally my opinion. So this whole threat, this has been going on since then. Somebody else like that's interesting to watch, if you go back and read or watch videos of Ron Paul. He was in Congress in 1991. When the Cold War ended and they started talking about expanding NATO, Ron Paul was like, we got to disband NATO. We don't need it. Like, he was warning. And then when the 2014 coup happened, same thing. Ron Paul was like, what are you people doing? You're risking a nuclear war with Russia. So Ron Paul's been talking about this since 1991 and highlighting it in 2014 when the U.S. orchestrated coup happened. The idea this is unprovoked or a surprise, that's bogus. Like that's silly. They can't possibly believe that unless they're like, 16 years old and don't know anything about history. Anyway, we'll put all these links in the show notes. If you go to the webpage, they'll be in there after this publishes. Also, the link to the first show I did, Meddling in European Affairs in Russia. I got into the history more in that show than I did now. So anyway, I want to talk about some other references here. Like, okay, now what do you think should happen in a war, right? Something like this. There's two approaches generally. The U.S. can kind of egg it on, send them weapons, fund it, or we could try to go for peace. Now, what has the U.S. government done? They've sent somewhere in the neighborhood of $54 billion so far in weapons and aid and totally egged them on. They've actually blocked peace negotiations, even in the beginning when Ukraine was considering it and Russia was willing. The U.S. blocked it. In October, the U.S. administration formally announced that peace negotiations are off the table. It's not under consideration. Not interested in peace. They're doing the opposite. They're setting up for continuing the war indefinitely. They're talking about the war, like certainly through the winter and exactly how things can happen through the winter. One article I read by some people from the Biden administration, they're talking about 10 years. Like they're thinking of how this war is going to play out for 10 years. It's a little frustrating to realize that these people sound like they're thinking like it's Saddam Hussein or something, or Osama bin Laden. They're talking about the guy who has the biggest nuclear arsenal in the world, and they're treating him like Saddam Hussein. Oh, by the way, he's a crazy man. He's insane. He's like off his rocker, and he has more nuclear weapons than anybody in the world, but he won't do anything. We'll just push him around. The way the U.S. government has to pick up some 2-bit country, every couple of years, pick up some 2-bit country and throw them against the wall just to make sure the world knows that the American government means business. Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, helping in Yemen, Afghanistan. Yeah, we seem to be able to get away with that. We spend $2 trillion and 3,000 people might get killed over 20 years, but they are not going to really kill us. Took down some buildings and stuff, but they can't really take over the United States. Russia, on the other hand, if Putin decided, he could wipe out most major cities in the U.S. tomorrow. Like we're talking about poking a bear that could very easily just say, this is crazy, just nuke Washington. We can't stop a full-on nuclear assault. That's why you see the New York City promo, as sick as it is. Somebody, one of the Unsafe Space listeners, posted that on Twitter yesterday. The New York City promo about what to do in a nuclear blast. It's like go inside and stuff. No. And the nuclear weapons they have now are like way bigger than Fat Boy that they used on Japan. It's astounding. This is, I look at it like your friend's in a bar and he's drunk, and he starts teasing some big guy, couple big guys, and poking at him and giving him a hard time. And he comes over to you and you give him another beer and a baseball bat and send them back over. Like, that's what the U.S. is doing with Ukraine. Maybe they're going to conduct this war until every Ukrainian's dead. I don't know what their plan is. Anyway, the one thing they don't want to do is negotiate for peace. They have done one negotiation. Since this war started in February, there's been one negotiation between the U.S. State Department and the Russians. It was that athlete, was it an NBA guy who got caught with some drugs in Russia, and they stuck him in jail. They were negotiating on that. Like, I guess politically, it's more important to see if they can free a famous athlete or semi-famous athlete who had some drug charges in Russia. Don't take drugs to Russia. That seems like an easy one to me. But anyway, that's the only thing they've negotiated on. Like, that is more important politically than working to lower the risk of nuclear war. Biden's refused to talk to Putin. And maybe it's a good idea Biden will talk to Putin. I'm not suggesting that's what we do. Come to think of it, that's probably a bad idea. But there are people in the State Department who should be talking to their counterparts in the Russian State Department about how to end this before it goes nuclear, as the expression is. They're preparing to go on forever. All right. The next thing I want to get into, I want to start talking about money, because following the money is always a good thing. So U.S. funding, so far it's been about $54 billion. There's a new package going on right now. It was Biden requested $14 billion more, but they are only doing $12 billion. Actually, this vote was yesterday, come to think of it. I don't know what happened. So if anybody knows, give me a chat, or a super chat. I'll definitely see. I do have it set up so I can read chat. So I will take a breath and read some chats along the way. If you do a super chat, Beverly will put it up. I can't miss those. Plus, you help us keep the lights on, which we're struggling with right now. We think YouTube is censoring us, and that's a chunk of what pays for the servers and keeps things in production. Anyway, the U.S. government so far has paid about rounding off, $54 billion. $54 billion since February for Ukraine. That's what's been passed by Congress. I don't know if every dollar of it's been spent yet, but that's what they've allocated and passed. They're working on another $12 billion that was voted on yesterday, or supposed to be scheduled for a vote yesterday. That'll be $65 billion if that passes. There's no reason to expect it wouldn't pass. Thanks for the super sticker. Yeah, those pop up. They show up in red on my screen. Super sticker. I guess I don't even know what a super sticker is, but yeah, thanks, justifiably stupid. The fact that you're here means you're not stupid to me. Thanks for watching. Anyway, $65 billion, that's a lot of money. What do they use it for? Oh yeah, here's the 54 number. So Zelensky, as they say, like, there's a great Tucker Carlson video it shows, like, what is this guy in a t-shirt telling us that he needs 20 more billion from the American taxpayers now? Like, who is this guy in a t-shirt trying to tell us that? It's a great one. Anyway, yeah, the $2 billion the $14 billion that Biden requested, Congress dropped a couple of things in there. One of them was monkeypox research. I'm not exactly sure why Biden requested, whatever it was, part of $2 billion for monkeypox research. and something else, I think Louisiana flood help. Or anyway, the monkeypox thing got deleted. That's one of the ways they got it down to 12 billion. So they're trying to save money. They're not going to spend 14 billion. They're only going to spend 12. Anyway, this is a Fox News article. Going up to 65. Just trying to show you where some of these sources I have come from. The amount, a lot of this was done in direct weapons. So I don't actually know what the total is. I looked briefly for the show, but then it was time to go on the air and I never found it. But I did find this. This is from March 16th. So remember, February 24th was the invasion. So by March, the U.S. government had already allocated $2 billion, and they sent them almost $1 billion. I think it was 800 million. This is in March. So this is 3 weeks after the invasion. I just thought I'd, just for fun, think about what your tax money has been doing this last 6 months. 800 Stinger anti-aircraft systems, 2,000 Javelins, those are little missiles, 1,000 light anti-arbor weapons, 6,000 AT-4 anti-armor systems, 100 tactical unmanned aerial systems. Those are drones, tactical drones. Those are the things that the U.S. government, this was it Obama or Trump? I forget who, ordered an assassination of a U.S. citizen a few years ago. And they've killed lots and lots of people in Iraq, Afghanistan, with these things. So that's what those are. They gave 100 of them to Ukrainians. I don't know if I assume they're using them on the Donetsk and Luhansk people. That'd be a lot better than the Russian shells they were lobbing in there. Now they can pinpoint schools and that sort of thing like the U.S. government does. Take out a wedding. Anyway, I digress. 100 grenade launchers, 5,000 rifles, 1,000 pistols, 400 machine guns, 400 shotguns, 20 million rounds of small arms ammunition, grenade launchers, mortar rounds, 25,000 sets of body armor, 25,000 helmets. In addition to the weapons listed above, previous United States assistance committed to Ukraine includes more Stinger anti-aircraft, 2,600 more Javelins, 5 Mi-17 helicopters. That's fun. Few attack helicopters, 3 patrol boats, counter artillery, aerial tracking radars, counter mortar radar, 200 grenade launchers, 200 shotguns, 200 machine guns, 40 million rounds of small arms ammunition, 1 million grenade, mortar, and artillery rounds, 70 they're the fun version of the Humvee, the real military ones. Secure communications, electronic warfare, body armor, helmets, tactical gear, military medical equipment, explosive ordnance disposal, satellite imagery, and analysis capability. Again, we're talking about March 16th. This is just a couple weeks. So you can tell, there's no question, these guys were they were hair-triggered, all set up. They've been pushing Putin since 1991 and really hard since 2014. And when Putin actually did it, they were like, all right, game on, folks, let's go. They sent him all this stuff. There's a crazy amount of stuff. To keep this in mind, okay, Congress throws around these numbers, 65 billion, like 54 billion, 12 billion more. Here's $1 billion worth of stuff right there. Like, what does that really represent? So I thought, well, I'm going to look up, just to get kind of a sense of that. Here's the Russian military expenditures from 93 to 2021. This is basically since the Cold War ended. That was 91, but I guess they don't have the data for 2 years before that. This is in Statista, generally pretty reliable place to get numbers. All right, 2021, there's a little uptick. 2021, the total Russian military expenditure was 66 billion in today's US dollars. So if the bill that was voted on yesterday passed and gets signed, which I expect that it will, but who knows? We're pretty close to it now. The US government, which is us, because government has no money, has spent in the last 6 months since Putin invaded Ukraine, they spent the same amount of money that Russia spent in all of 2021 on all of their military. We sent that to Ukraine. Another kind of a scale thing, I looked up roads. So the total federal funding for all roads that they did, all 50 states and DC and territories last year in 2021 was 53 billion. So if you're an American taxpayer or you're not born yet, because they borrow money and print like willy-nilly, they print like the Weimar Republic, the federal government has given more money and weapons to Ukraine in the last 6 months to stir up this war with Russia than they spent all last year on roads, and more money than the entire Russian military spent all last year. Like, that's the kind of numbers we're talking about here. There's a lot of money getting floating around. So follow the money is always an interesting thing. So there's 2 reference points for you for what they're doing. More than all the roads, more than the about the same as what the Russian military spent all last year. And that's just the US. The EU is also funding it. So Ukraine just got 2 billion in euros just recently, and that's part of a $5 billion total package, that 5 billion euros, not dollars, which is about the same. So the US, there's another 5 billion from the EU. In mid-October, they got 2 billion of that. And another little money thing, this is a little bit of a side, but it kind of amuses me. So, because it's fun watching Elon Musk. So as a little side, let me talk about Elon Musk. Starlink, which is part of SpaceX, the satellite internet system. Starlink has been spending their own money since February, about 20 million a month in expenses. They donated terminals, thousands of terminals, to the Ukraine government, and have been providing internet service for free since February to the Ukraine government and the military. Ukraine has said that this is critical for operating both the government and for the military operations. Like, they require this. That's a term I heard, critical, translated from Ukrainian, I assume, but they consider this quite important. And part of the problem is that Russia has taken out a lot of their infrastructure. So the land-based internet throughout Ukraine is severely disrupted by the war. And that is how Russia started, was attacking that kind of infrastructure stuff to try to, they were disabling. Before they really started attacking people, they were doing a lot of infrastructure. Anyway, Starlink, Elon Musk, Starlink, SpaceX, they've been providing about 20 million. And it's also in use by private citizens. Some, they have to buy their own terminals. Elon Musk isn't donating for that, as far as I know. Maybe he did some, I don't know. The terminals that I know of were donated to the government and for the military by Ukraine. So Elon Musk has been supporting Ukraine in this war to the tune of 20 million a month since February. That's some serious cash, even for a guy like Elon. 80 million, 100 million, something like that. And the problem is that Russia, one of the problems, besides they're bleeding cash bad, it's the costs are going up because Russia has been working harder and harder to hack and interfere and disable the Starlink system. So now SpaceX and Elon Musk, they got this problem that Russia is spending a lot of effort to try to disable Starlink. And so they're spending a lot more money countering that threat. And Elon Musk is saying that they're looking at 30 million a month in the near future. So he's talking, if we have to do this for another 10 months, if you guys keep this war going, we're talking $300 million. That'll bankrupt Starlink. Like, they can't do that. I assume Elon Musk does not want Starlink to go in the way of every single previous attempt to do satellite internet to the public, which all failed in bankruptcy. It's a super complicated, expensive thing to do. Nobody's seated yet at that, and Elon Musk might be able to. The guy that can lower the cost of putting a satellite or a man to the space station, putting up a satellite by a factor of 10, compete with NASA. That's not an easy thing to do. And even though you can get in the argument of Elon's first thing he does is go to the government and get special favors and all. Either way, he's working in the environment he has to work in. He's managed to put satellites up for 1/10 of the cost of the federal government through NASA. And that's why SpaceX is now doing the supplies for the International Space Station, because they could do it for 1/10 of the cost. Anyway, that's a guy who maybe could pull this off. And that's what Starlink is. It's a cool thing, Starlink, if you live remotely. Beverly would love to have a Starlink, I'm sure. I hear her talking about it. Anyway, if you want to live in rural Pennsylvania, Starlink's a great way to get it, if you can get it to work, if they do it. Anyway, so sorry to digress. That's why it's easier to read me, save time. Elon Musk is looking at his numbers and saying, we can't afford this. We got to end this war. So he came up with some peace proposals. Seems like a reasonable thing. There's a lot of people who are thinking about peace right now, basically saying like, hey guys, why don't you just end this? This is getting ludicrous. Here's some peace proposals. Guess what happened to Musk? All the regime media attacks him for being a Russian supporter, pro-Putin stooge. He's a Russian agent. And then a ambassador, I think it was the ambassador to Germany, he says, I don't think I've ever said this word in here, but since I'm quoting a Ukrainian ambassador, I think it's the ambassador to Germany, his response to Elon Musk was, fuck you. So how do you react? How would you react? I know how I would react. Like, you think, okay, I just donated $80 million. I'm risking bankrupting a new company I got going here. 80 million, even for Musk, is a lot of money. The response is F you and being called a Russian agent. Elon Musk, he said it's funny if you read his Twitter account. He just said, okay, I'll oblige your FU, Russia. We're going to shut down Starlink in Ukraine. And he did say if the federal government, U.S. federal government funds it, maybe he'll keep it on. And the Pentagon is considering funding Starlink for Ukraine. I think it's funny. I would just shut them down because I don't think we should be helping them. And Elon Musk is he's kind of a based guy on stuff like that. So he just said, okay. And his, like I said, check his Twitter account. He's funny. He just says, all right, I'll oblige you. We'll shut it down. All right. I'm going to cover a couple more things here. I'm going to stop the share here. Beverly's training me on how to do this myself. So if this takes, I think I did I not even show the stream? I can't remember now. Somebody in chat will have to pull it. James Dugan said, I would pull the Starlink. Yeah, I agree, James. That's what I would do. Anyway, I don't know if I actually showed this successfully or not, but just in case I didn't, because when I looked down, it wasn't there. 66 billion in current dollars. That was the military spending in Russia. Again, if I do something wrong with driving this, just let me know. Okay. That's the Starlink. A couple other events. I'm just going to kind of blast through some other things that happened. The Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines, it's two different sets. I don't know how many there are total, but there's several pipelines in each project. That's this long thing across the North Sea from Russia to Germany. They were shut down by Germany due to sanctions against Russia. Sanctions are an act of war, so Germany is committing an act of war against Russia. And sanctions are extra fun for the government because they're actually an attack against the people of your own country. So Germany is committing an act of war against the people of its own country by shutting down a huge source of energy in Germany and other parts of Western Europe. Those pipelines go to Germany, and Germany resells the natural gas elsewhere into Europe. That's been shut down since the beginning of this war, following the U.S. lead with the sanctions. I don't want to laugh about it. For people who know where Germany is, it's pretty far north, like Nova Scotia, far north. It gets cold there in the winter. And this is a big source of heat. So firewood is a trending Twitter hashtag in Germany right now. And they're serious. They're importing firewood from Canada. I know that's crazy. But yeah, they cut down trees in Canada and ship them across the ocean. And they use them in their green energy plants. And they're going to be using them for firewood. So it's hard to imagine such a developed Western country as Germany seriously looking at heating their homes with firewood, like 1800s level technology. Even though I had a wood stove at home and I lived in New Jersey, I love it. It's fun on the weekends to heat the house with wood. For home early in the evening, run the wood stove, turn the heat on. It's really cool. I have relatives up in North Vermont and all that. They heat with wood almost all the time. They're in a wooded area. There's wood all around. Wood's pretty cheap. It's cheaper than oil. And have an old leaky house. That's the way to do it. But you talk about a city, and in Germany, Europe, for people who've been to Europe, they cut down all the trees in Europe like hundreds and hundreds of years ago. There's really not. That's why they have to import trees from Canada for their green energy plants. Anyway, again, I digress. So these two pipelines were built, and Russia was selling natural gas to Germany and hence to the rest of Europe. Somebody blew them up. You probably heard the reports. Like, who blew them up? No one's taking credit. Terrorist organizations normally take credit like 2 seconds after the event. Also, I've read a little bit about it. It's a pretty difficult thing to pull off. It seems that it's either the UK or the United States. They're the two obvious candidates who could pull this off and get away with it secretly. There was first talks of, some of the other European countries do it, but basically the consensus seems to be nobody else has the capability of doing that. So I'm quite curious. I hope we eventually find this out, but they were large explosions, like large amounts of explosives deep under the sea in particular points next to a pipeline that's hard to find if you don't know where it is. And there was 2 of them and 3 explosions, 2 different sets of pipelines, and they went off at the same time. That seems crazy. Like, who did that? Obviously, they're trying to egg this on. Of course, the theories come out in the beginning that it's Russia. That's ridiculous. Like, first off, if Russia didn't want the gas to flow, they can turn it off from their end. Like, they're the ones supplying the gas. Secondly, it's a huge external source of cash for Russia. Russia didn't want to lose that. I don't know for sure, but Russia doesn't have sanctions against selling gas to Germany right now. If Germany wanted to buy gas, Russia would sell it. I don't know why they wouldn't. I assume Russia would sell it. So the idea that Russia would do this, that's silly. Plus, if you've been watching the news or listening to me today, Russia's pretty busy. And as far as egging on the war, I don't even see a good theory for why this would help Russia. So I think it's close to nil, the chance that Russia did it, which is the other country that has a military that maybe could pull it off. The other problem is if Russia had military ships over these pipelines at the time of that explosion, we would be hearing a lot about it. But there were American Aegis cruisers in the area. There's all kinds of ships in there. There's American, I don't know if it's an Aegis cruiser. I shouldn't say that. I've forgotten what kind of ships there were, but there were large American military ships in that area just before those explosions and at the time of the explosions. I'm just saying that I don't know who did it, but somebody's obviously wants this war to escalate. That's why you take the Nord Stream out. There's talk that one of them still has gas in it, one of the pipelines, and maybe with some repair, that would be fine. And Germany is saying there may be 1 or 2 more that can be repaired. If Germany can repair them, it's expected that they will do that. But that's a tricky thing. It's deep in the water. Another thing, the Kerch Strait bridge that connects Crimea to Russia, somebody blew that up. Crimea has since 2014 has been part of Russia. There's a lot of stuff moves back and forth across that strait. if you look at the map, I can show that quickly here. I meant to do this earlier. Here's the map. Here's Crimea. This is the strait here. We're talking about the Kerch Strait. It goes from this part of Russia into Crimea. This Sevastopol, that's the warm water base. That's the reason that Russia does not want access to Crimea to go away. I don't think I mentioned it, but prior to the annexation, prior to the vote of Crimea to leave Ukraine, Ukraine had a lease agreement with Russia for Sevastopol. That's the only warm water Navy base for Russia. They cannot have. They are not going to lose that. I suspect Putin would do whatever it takes to keep Sevastopol. Otherwise, the Russian Navy would be icebound all winter. I can't imagine Russia would let that happen. So I think that's a line in the sand. And when Crimea voted to in the referendum to leave Ukraine and join Russia, when Ukraine was talking about banning Russian as an official language and other anti-Russia economic measures, it seems the U.S., the UN, even though a lot of places didn't officially recognize it, they did let that one go. So I think even the Pentagon guys look at that and like, yeah, we better just let this Crimea thing just lie, because that's their only warm water port. Anyway, I just want to talk about the Strait. So that's the only way to get by truck, car, whatever, from Russia into Crimea. There's a railroad line right next to that bridge. The bomb that blew up started a fire in a fuel train on that railroad, but the railroad survived. 2 of the 4 spans are still drivable, so they didn't manage to take the whole bridge out. And why this is up, it's always interesting to look at a place that most of us didn't even really know where this was before this war. But anyway, this whole eastern part here, this is all really Russian people for the most part, ethnically Russian speakers. What's happened is some of these other parts are also now voting. Who knows if the votes are right? They don't want this either. They're tired of all this. They want to just join Russia and be done. But anyway, this pink part here, that's the Donbass, 2 Donbass regions. That's where 14,000 people have been killed by the Ukraine government since 2014. Okay, there's that aside. I have to find where I'm at in my notes. Yeah, the Kerch Strait Bridge. So somebody blew that up. Now, Ukraine sort of took credit. They certainly are celebrating it. U.S. government's celebrating. NATO's celebrating. A lot of Western governments were celebrating. The regime media in the U.S. is like, oh, yeah, okay. The problem is that's like deep inside Russia, really. So blowing up a bridge inside Russia that's a key transportation route, if you're interested in peace, that's not the thing to do. Anyway, it was a truck bomb. It came out of Armenia. It went through Russia, and it was traveling toward Crimea at the time. The guy who owns that is Russian. He's claiming, like, I didn't know nothing about it. He owns a trucking company. He owns that truck. It's not even clear if the driver knew. He could have been just a dupe. It was a tractor trailer. Large explosion. Actually, I had a picture of it. Anyway, it's been at least widely celebrated and take credit of it. There's open source discussions in the UK that SAS is involved. SAS was involved in that SAS provided the explosives. Perhaps they had a remote detonator and the driver didn't even know. It seems likely that nobody knew. It passed a checkpoint in Russia, whatever they were faking it. I don't know the details of how they faked that, but it had to be a truck full of explosions. So I heard this, if you're familiar with Colonel Douglas McGregor, he was on Napolitano's Judging Freedom podcast. Great show, by the way, as an aside. He was talking about the capabilities of the British Special Forces, the SAS, and that he considers the stories quite possible, maybe likely, like, are the British trying to help egg this on? So I tried to verify that. So here's my, I'll start at the beginning, hashtag sarcasm, but I'm actually thinking, I don't know if I'm really being sarcastic. The day of that explosion, a British Army expert by the name of Tony Spammer, I have the link here, but I've been showing a lot of links. Well, I won't bother with this one. You can look it up. It's called The Sun, the U.S. Sun. British Army expert Tony Spammer, he's a Army bridge demolition expert for the UK. The day of the explosion, he went on, he quote unquote cast doubt on the truck bomb theory. He said, it's unlikely. A truck couldn't do that. It wouldn't blow up that way. It wouldn't do that to the bridge. That's not the way it was attacked from underneath. That must be what happened. And then they reported there was mysterious shapes under the bridge the moments before. Articles from that time. If you look at the day of the explosion, it's like pictures of Ukrainian drone, bomb boat washed up on a beach or something. Anyway, I kind of think you see that whole story. Like the theory is that it was a bomb boat, a drone bomb boat underneath the bridge that had to be attacked from underneath. That's what a British Army bridge demolition expert was saying the day of the explosion. I don't know why he jumped in so fast. To me, that's like a backhanded confirmation that the SAS did it, that the British government had involved. I'm being a little bit sarcastic, but that's kind of funny. They're like top bridge demolition experts, says it couldn't have been a truck bomb the day that a truck bomb blows up the bridge. We all know it was a truck bomb now. Anyway, it's of course being celebrated and touted as like huge success. Whoever did it, Ukraine government, British government, one of those two, or maybe, and perhaps both, maybe more likely both. I don't know. I haven't heard a theory that the U.S. government was involved in this one. But anyway, two of the lanes are in use. So the bridge survived. The railroad next to it had a fuel train on it. They blew up this truck bomb next to a fuel train. That's interesting. The fuel train caught on fire, but the railroad survived. Most military equipment shipped around Russia goes by rail. So the rail survived. Taking out that bridge, probably one of, from what I've heard, probably one of taking out that much. James says in chat, there was footage of a barge under the bridge just before the explosion. So is that the mysterious, maybe that's a mysterious shape? It's possible, but from what everybody's saying now, the bridge is still open. So it's a double bridge. So even if you took out one whole span and couldn't be fixed, you got the other span. So I'm going to just read a couple of comments because I saw another one interesting here from El Vaquero 555. Hello. Buenos tardes. One leg of the Nord Stream 2 survived. Russia told the Germans they'd turn it on if Germany was willing to pay. So El Vaquero is saying that, yeah, Russia, what I would expect, that Russia would sell natural gas to Europe if it wanted. Russia doesn't have sanctions against selling gas to Europe. Why would they do that? I don't think Putin, you might call him evil, but Putin is not a stupid guy. So sure, it's another reason that they want. So the fact, what he's saying here, Russia told the Germans they'd turn it back on. If they said that and then they blew it up, like those things don't work. So I don't think it. And then he said, of course the U.S. did it. They want to sell energy to Europe. It's been the U.S. plan for 10 plus years. Probably true. Also, I didn't know this. Is interesting, El Vaquero. Thank you. Russia has a lease on a naval facility in Syria. I didn't know that. It doesn't border Russia, but it is. You can drive without going through too much. I think. Yeah, you can drive to Syria. So that's a good place. It's not like Sevastopol and so close to Russia, but I didn't know about that. Most of the Sevastopol is a huge base for Russia. Actually, I worked for a defense contractor. I did naval communication stuff for 20 years. So yeah, I've heard of that place. I'll leave it at that. Heard of Sevastopol, but I didn't know about the Syria one. Maybe there's no subs there. And here comes the dim side. Sevastopol is a type of goose, too. Okay. Yeah, we do need a little lightening up on this particular topic. Anyway, I digress. From reading comments, the rail survived, so the military supplies are still moving across. So anyway, what was the reaction to this? You could say blowing up the pipeline maybe as part of it. Immediately after the bridge, so somebody blew up the pipeline, somebody blew up the Kerch Strait bridge to Crimea. Russia's reaction, they responded by missile attacks, and they started attacking some targets that they haven't been. Putin's been doing kind of a low-level thing, taking out infrastructure. Yeah, they've hit some apartments and that sort of thing, but they haven't done like an all-out assault. But anyway, they responded with missile attacks, all kinds of targets that they weren't previously targeting. Ukraine reported that a quarter of the missiles were shot down. This is kind of funny. Read about the little bit. Like I saw one that one group shot down 2 cruise missiles headed from Russia to Kiev with a shoulder-fired anti-helicopter weapon. That, like, yeah, when the zombie apocalypse comes around, I want a guy on my 6 that can take out a cruise missile with a shoulder-fired helicopter. Yeah, that's hard to believe. You know, a cruise missile going overhead, I saw a calculation estimated 40 seconds. Several times the speed of sound, typically those things go. So, yeah, how far do you lead that? So just picture a shoulder-fired, like, first off, they're hard to hold and shoot. I've never shot one, but they're kind of recoilless, I guess, the way they work. But it's a big thing. You can hit a helicopter that's right there overhead if you're good with it, right? It's pretty hard to hit a plane. It has to be like super slow, low flying in a plane. Our cruise missile, like a missile heading maybe hundreds of miles that goes overhead. Like, you look up, calculate the altitude, calculate the speed, estimate the lead time, calculate the angle in your head by eye. You got to know the travel time of your shoulder-fired missile. How much do you lead it? Which way is it going? Pull the trigger. And like one little group took out 2 that way. Sorry for my skepticism. That doesn't sound possible. I'd like to see the numbers on that. It's not quite my field, but my minor was physics with a concentration of astrophysics. So my degree is engineering. Yeah, show me the numbers on how you can take down a missile with a anti-helo shoulder-fired rocket. Maybe it's possible. I don't know. That's a hell of a shot. That's right up there in that Kyle, the sniper that did the headshot at 2 miles with a 50 cal. Yeah, that's quite a shot, and it's on a moving target. That's a good one. Anyway, again, I digress. If I was writing, I wouldn't have gone through all that. Sorry for the time. Anyway, that's what Russia did. That's the response. So as far as escalating, which is really my whole point here, that's why I'm rambling on about this. Somebody's trying to escalate this. We know the U.S. is trying to escalate it. We know the U.K. is trying to escalate it. We know NATO is trying to escalate it. Putin is escalating. I don't know if he wants to or not. Hard to tell. The explosion of the pipeline and the bridge, the Kerch Strait bridge, was reacted to by Russia with missile attacks, like major. So 80% of Ukraine's air defense was taken out. That's what the reports are. I forget who said the 80%, but one confirmation has been Zelensky all over, like, demanding that the U.S. send more air defense equipment and air attack equipment. Like, seems to make sense the way they're like screaming for more money for that particular thing. Tend to believe it's somewhere in that range. Anyway, winter's coming. So if you think, like, what's going to happen next? Winter's coming. Winter is totally Russia's advantage. Like, Russia's got all the fuel it needs, no problem. It can move troops around. It can send missiles. It can heat everybody's house. Like, that's a cool thing. Europe, Europe's in big trouble this winter if something doesn't change. Secondly, the ground is about to freeze up there. Once the ground freezes, Russia's got like full movement with troops everywhere easily. Russia's got the advantage in that kind of equipment. So once the ground freezes, if the U.S. and NATO and the Ukraine, which is their stooges, basically they report to the U.S. government, from what I can tell. Once the ground freezes, I wouldn't expect this to go any better. The regime media is continuously reporting that Ukraine is winning. That's bogus. If Ukraine could win, it'd already be over. Second off, Ukraine doesn't have any nuclear weapons. Putin's got more than anybody in the world. Putin's going to win this unless they turn it into World War III. And if they turn it into World War III, nobody wins. That's the mutual assured destruction mad scenario. Like, those are the two choices here. Ukraine and Europe are going to be in big trouble. Ukraine's got huge energy problems right now. They're even, I saw a few days ago, they took out the local power to a Ukrainian nuclear plant. That they're taking out infrastructure. So Ukraine's going to be in trouble for energy. Europe's already in trouble. Russia has plenty of fuel. So as far as a protracted proxy war, the way they're doing it right now, seems to me, my guess, Russia's going to take it out. There were new referendums done. I just wanted to mention that to leave Ukraine. It's not only the Donbass regions now. There's some other regions voted, and I don't know if the stats are right. They were conducted by Russia, so you can say these areas are under Russian occupation, and they had a vote. I don't know whether to trust that or not, but it's understandable. People want to leave. So the results were reported to be overwhelmingly join Russia, and they reported a high turnout. I don't know whether to believe that, but I'm inclined to think that there was a decent turnout and joining Russia won. Seems reasonable. Russian-speaking people. Ukraine's been shelling a large area for 8 years, killed 14,000 people. And then now 8 months of war with the U.S. just egging it on, sending more guns, sending more money, egging it on, not even willing to contemplate discussing peace. Another thing that's going on right now that's fun to think about, this week, guess what started on Monday? NATO and the U.S. are conducting nuclear war exercises. It's called Operation Steadfast Noon. Now, if you're thinking about peace or versus thinking about starting a nuclear war, what would you do this week? So here's the idea. This is what NATO and the U.S. did. They're conducting exercises on nuclear war, specifically nuclear war exercises. Steadfast Noon is the name of operation. For anybody that hasn't heard of this, they're practicing invasion and annihilation of Russia. That's what they're doing. It's over Belgium, the North Sea, and the UK. They said that 600 miles from Russia is the minimum. They're not going to go closer than 600 miles from Russia. But that's not that far. That's like where Charleston, South Carolina is for me. I'd be nervous if Russia was doing a joint exercise with 60 aircraft, fighters, B-52 bombers, tankers, surveillance planes. There's 14 of the 30 NATO member countries are participating in a week-long exercise practicing nuclear invasion and annihilation of Russia. Anyway, that's what they're doing this week. That's their good idea. If anybody think that's a good idea. And then Putin's sitting back there in Moscow watching this and thinking, what are these guys doing? So here's the question. Here's the next question. Will Russia lose? The podcast I mentioned earlier, Colonel Doug McGregor, great guy to listen to on this stuff, especially if you want to get away from I love the Scott Horton, anti-war guys he has on. Doug McGregor is a great fat guy, and he's a little more in the regime part, but he's still willing to speak out. He said, Judge Napolitano asked him, "Will Russia lose?" His reaction was no, like that, like emphatic, no. Russia's not going to lose this, and he presented the argument why. He's also saying that Putin is a guy that actually he knows. Putin's made it clear is what he said. He's not going to use nuclear weapons unless attacked by nuclear weapons. So it is kind of up to the U.S., Great Britain, to decide to make this nuclear. I don't know. Who do you trust? I don't trust Biden or Putin. I'm inclined to trust Putin a little more than Biden for reasons I won't get into right now. He's saying he doesn't expect it to go nuclear. He also says Russia's going to win this. It's possible the only alternative is World War III and nobody wins. He didn't say that. That's me thinking. But Russia's got the advantage here. All right. I promised I would do a follow the money. Let me go through this really quick. So like I said, follow the money. I used to do a show called Liberty Solutions before this one. Follow the money was always a section I did. God, I'm going long here. I didn't mean to be this long. I've been fired up about this, so I got too many notes. Anyway, for anybody that's still hanging in with me, expansion of NATO is a huge cash cow. If you read the U.S. plans, like what the U.S. plan is doing right now, they're planning on rearming the Ukraine military. So all of these former Soviet bloc countries, including Ukraine, they have Russian weapons mostly. That was one of the problems with the aircraft. Like they give them American helicopters, but Ukraine uses Russian jets, Russian helicopters, Russian guns, Russian mortars, it's all Russian stuff. And they buy spare parts from Russia, but they're obviously not getting spare parts right now. The way U.S. Can save Ukraine in this is to sell them all new weapons. There's some cash if you want to follow the money. U.S. has a plan over the next 10 years. U.S. government has a plan over the next 10 years to replace everything in Ukraine, all the Russian stuff with U.S. built stuff. That's small arms to fighter aircraft, the whole gamut, all of it. Also in that plan is to rearm all of the Soviet bloc countries that are part of NATO. The U.S. is obligated under the NATO treaty to go to war if a country's attacked. These places have mostly Russian weapons left over. Like that's what they know how to do. Like in Ukraine, they talked about, we're going to send them old F-16s from Poland or something, or F-35s. But no, none of those guys know how to fly that stuff. They're trained in MiGs. So we're talking, I made a list: Slovakia, Chechnya, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Ukraine. There may be some more in there I missed. Like you're talking some cash here. Maybe we should be buying stock in Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman. Like, you know how much money this is to those companies and to the congressmen of their districts for campaigns and all these executives that go back and forth between DC three-letter agencies and these companies. I'll read that again: Slovakia, Chechnya, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Ukraine. Replace everything from pistols to fighter jets in all those places. I think that's what they actually want. Like that's the purpose of this. To me, follow the money. I think that's the whole purpose. Going to rearm all the former Soviet bloc countries, and over the next 10 years. And the best way for them to accomplish that is to get everybody stirred up. And if people are like, New York is putting out nuclear war, how to handle what happens when a nuclear bomb goes off in New York City, it's all part of this. This whole thing is part of this fear mongering. And it's actually true. They are threatening nuclear war. So that's what this is. So the boundary of Ukraine, like that's really what we're arguing about here. Should this line be here or over here? Like I went through the history of Ukraine and what's around Ukraine. I don't know where the line should be in Ukraine. You got Polish-speaking people, Ukrainian people speak Russian heritage, Russian-speaking people, and there's more. I don't even know them all. I don't know where these lines should be. They've moved, every 50, 100 years or so, 200 years. The lines have moved for the last 1,500 years. So I don't claim to know where the lines in Ukraine should be. I don't think the U.S. government should be trying to get into this business. This is all ridiculous. So the lines have varied throughout history. What's correct now? I don't know. It's not for us to dictate. We should leave Europe to Europe. I know I always talk about the Constitution. I got to flash this up once during the show. Constitution. This is going to war. Like handing guns and money to Ukraine to fund a war is part of the war. U.S. is part of it. They've also done sanctions. You can't use force. We shouldn't even be supporting without a declaration of war. This requires Congress declare war before the president can conduct the war for a good reason. You don't want the same person to make the decision to go to war and to end a war and also conduct the war. That's too much of a conflict of interest. Bad news. So that's a danger. All this is being done under that AUMF, the Authorization for Use of Military Force, that was passed in after 9/11 to go after the terrorists. They've expanded that to be, we can spend any money on anything, put troops anywhere we want, attack and overthrow any country we want. All that came out of the 9/11. Never let a crisis go to waste. Anyway, I'm going to kind of talk. I got two more things, and then I'm going to close this out. It is a long show. I just read a quote. I have to read this one because it's hilarious, from James Dugan. Thank you. He said, "Don't forget 10% for the big guy." Yeah, I didn't even get into the big guy, and the reward for, what did Biden withhold, $1 billion in aid to Ukraine? And the reward for that is clearly Biden's son, Hunter, getting a job as a consultant, whatever you call it, high paid, very highly paid consultant in an energy company in Ukraine, a business he knows absolutely nothing about, conducted in a language he doesn't speak. That's my summary of that. With 10% for the big guy. We know who the big guy is now. And now he's president. So yeah, he's all over this. Anyway, I've been doing this thought experiment. I've been working this out. So here it is. I'd like you guys to think through this, and this is a thought experiment, like I said. It's an analogy. So think about if the Warsaw Pact was still around. So you know how NATO continued after 1991 when the Cold War ended. They kept NATO around. Like, the purpose of NATO is gone. NATO was to counter the Soviet Union. Soviet Union's gone. They should have ended NATO. But they didn't. They repurposed NATO to be an anti-Russia. Russia is not Soviet Union, not by a long stretch. Yeah, Russia's GDP is like less than Germany. It's not even a... Yeah, Russia is not the Soviet Union. That's all I'll say. So the Warsaw Pact was the equivalent of NATO. Poland and Russian. I mean, that was the opposition to NATO. When Soviet Union ended, that's all broken up. It doesn't even exist anymore. Okay, so here's my thought experiment. Assume the Warsaw Pact stayed after the Cold War. And I want to do a Canada analogy. So just think, and again, I have to say right up front, this is just a thought experiment. There's some things about this are ridiculous, including the first one. So President Justin Trudeau moves more towards capitalism and away from socialism. It's a thought experiment. Just picture Justin Trudeau wanted to move away from socialism. He was getting kind of pro-capitalism. Russia objects because Russia and Canada had a tie, and they do actually have some trade ties. The Russian State Department handpicks a new president for Canada to replace Justin Trudeau. He's a pro-Russia guy named Zelensky with an I on the end. He's a Russian guy. So the State Department of Russia picks a new president. The Russian KGB also still exists. So the KGB orchestrates a coup. They do a forceful overthrow of the Ottawa government. Trudeau secretly escapes by helicopter to Quebec as shots are fired as a diversionary car trying to get away from the Parliament building on the river there in Ottawa. So then the next thing happens, Ottawa passes a law. They ban the French language as an official Canadian language. So, you know, Canada, there's two languages, English and French. So Ottawa passes a law. They ban French. Quebec has a referendum, which they've had multiple times, to secede and become independent. This is the final straw. Quebec finally votes to secede from Canada. They become independent. They petition to join Russia. Russia accepts them. They join. Then neo-Nazi groups that are kind of pro-Russia, they gain power in the Canadian military. Canada is not happy about Quebec seceding and joining Russia. They don't recognize Russia. They don't recognize Quebec as part of Russia. The U.S. government doesn't recognize. The UN doesn't. So Ottawa starts shelling Quebec. So for 8 years, Ottawa shells Quebec. They kill 15,000 people in Quebec over 8 years. Then Canada joins the Warsaw Pact. In my scenario, Russia installs missile sites in Ontario, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia that are capable of reaching DC with nuclear weapons. What would the U.S. do? That's my scenario. My theory about what the U.S. would do is it would be shock and awe too. Remember Iraq, Baghdad? That's what the U.S. would do. Ottawa would look like Baghdad right now. That is quite likely what the U.S. would do in this scenario. Then the U.S. would take over Ottawa and install a pro-U.S. government. That's my thought experiment. The biggest stretch in here, I think, is that Justin Trudeau moves more towards capitalism, away from socialism. The rest of it's quite plausible. Maybe I have to use a different president to make that more plausible. Anyway, I'm just going to touch on a few solutions and end this. I've really been going for a long time. So negotiation of peace, nah, that was ruled out of the question in mid-October by the U.S. Officials. Like I said, the only negotiation that the U.S. has conducted with Russia was for release of the athlete caught with drugs traveling in Russia. Peace has not been publicly even considered by Ukraine. They're planning on keeping this war going, I don't know, indefinitely, it looks. If peace was what they were interested in before the invasion, so before February 24th of this year, my opinion, they could have had peace. Ukraine could have committed to not joining NATO. Ukraine could have stopped the 8-year bombing campaign, shelling campaign against Donbass, and recognized the independence, that those two republics are independent countries. The US, the UN, Europe, the EU could have recognized Crimea as part of Russia and just said formally, okay, we're done. I think that would have been the solution in January of this year, and we wouldn't have any war. That doesn't seem like a big deal to me. If you don't want war, those are pretty small things to do, really. We don't need to run Ukraine. Now, it's probably another story. I don't think that's enough. So I think they have to redraw this borderland. I'm using the English translation of Ukraine. Redraw Ukraine for the nth time in 1,000 years. The eastern parts are going to be Russia, Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, and probably a couple other parts. That's how this is going to play out. My prediction. Predicting the future has a terrible track record, I know, but that's what I would expect. The eastern parts are going to end up being part of Russia. Ukraine's probably going to have to commit to not join NATO. I don't know how that'll play out. And then the U.S. and UN recognize Crimea, Donbass, and any other part as part of Russia. We'll see. I think the alternative is just escalation and more war, and we'll all be sitting here wondering, waiting for the H-bombs. Long-term, the long-term solution to me is completely obvious. We got to disband NATO entirely. It's worse than useless. It's dangerous. It's against U.S. interests. Disband NATO. U.S. needs to pull all the missile batteries and all the troops out of Eastern Europe along Russian borders. Just stop with that stuff. And then follow George Washington's advice on European affairs. Like, I don't know why this is so hard, folks. Follow their advice. All right. Now I'm going to try my training here. I got trained on how to roll the credits. So thanks everybody for watching. If you can throw us a few bucks here and there to keep the lights on, keep the servers running, help Carter, who's bleeding cash, trying to keep Unsafe Space going. We think YouTube is censoring us, and we're reduced some. Sorry if I'm part of that. I think some of the stuff I talk about, YouTube would rather I didn't say, but I'm just trying to tell the truth, folks. So yeah, if you guys can help us out, that would be awesome. We do all the content for free. This is a labor of love here. It's a passion. And also my girlfriend is quite happy if I just rant to you guys rather than rant to her, which is what will happen. If I wasn't doing this, she would get an earful about Ukraine, and she can only take about a minute of it. She's already left a totally screwed up country. She lived in South Africa for the first 35 years. So she knows what it's like to see a country go totally downhill and then have to abandon and go to another country. And when I talk about what's going on with this stuff, her response is like, well, we have to leave. And sometimes it seems hard to argue with that. I do actually just say, like, my normal response is, yeah, Florida should secede from the Union. I think that's what leaving is now, because I don't know of a better country to go to. When she came here 15 years ago or so, South Africa is in the toilet, and it's way worse now. But the U.S. looked reasonable, not too bad, at least from the point of view of somebody, 20,000 miles away. But now the U.S. looks a lot like what South Africa looked like when she was in high school, right before there was a regime change there. Tearing down statues, destroying history, Black Lives Matter, the whole bit. So anyway, I'm kind of down to the, leaving, but I don't necessarily want to leave Florida. I think Florida is not too bad a place to be when the United States falls apart. Anyway, just looking at the comments. Elena said, thanks for all the information. I'm glad to provide it. It helps me a lot to get all this out. All right. So again, I started saying goodbye. I'll see you next week. And I'm going to, this is a little bit of a trial for me. I'm going to roll the credits. So here we go. I'm flying. Beverly, I'm on my own here flying. So thanks for all your training. Here we go.
Thanks for sticking around until the end. If you're new to Unsafe Space, check out our deep content library that includes discussions with everyone from James Lindsay to Brett Weinstein. And please consider helping to fund our work by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on a variety of social media platforms, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space Discord server, which is open to financial supporters at any level. We hope to see you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. It would be better for your health if you forgot what you just heard. That should be easy for someone of your intelligence. The following co-conspirators are hereby ordered to watch CNN. Experts agree that 87,000 new tax collectors will make inflation feel like less of a problem. I think we can agree that the FBI's track record speaks for itself. If you think about it, only government-sanctioned experts should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. science, scientific, and scientifically are registered trademarks of the World Economic Forum. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.